afternoon. My name is Lindsay, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the Improving the Copy Editing Workflow, How Can Technologies Help conference call. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. If you should need assistance, press star then zero, and an operator will come online to assist you. Thank you. Mr. Siplak, you may begin your conference.
Thank you very much. So welcome everybody on behalf of SST and the AAUP. Today's session is titled Improving the Copy Editing Workflow, How Can Technology Help? And we have with us today a series of three speakers, Michael Caskell from Columbia University Press and Scott Beebe, who had been affiliated with Columbia University Press, now at Oxford University Press, will be the second pair of speakers going through the session today. And the first speaker that we'll be meeting with is John Muning from University of Chicago Press. I'll give you a little bit of background information to those fellows as we get up to the point of time of their presentations, but at first I would like to cover a couple of housekeeping issues. You had heard the WebEx operator indicate that if you have a problem during the session, that you should address the WebEx operator by pressing *0 in order to be able to get assistance. During the course of the presentation today, you will have the opportunity to be able to ask questions. The mechanism that we'll be using for this purpose is to go through and utilize the chat function within WebEx. This is located on the lower right of the WebEx screen that you'll be working with. All chat messages will be directed to me, the host, and I will do the very best job possible for you to go through to record questions that come in and then to make sure that they're directed to the appropriate individual. If you have a specific question that you would like to ask of one of the presenters, please feel free to do so during the course of the presentation, and we will take a series of these questions, 2 or 3 questions, after each presentation that will be directed to those individuals. After we've concluded both sessions and had the brief question and answer session for each of those presentations, we'll embark on a larger roundtable type of discussion with all of the presenters. And again, if you have a question that comes up at any point in time, please direct that via the chat mechanism, and I'll be happy to relay that to the presenters. Each presentation will run approximately 20 to 25 minutes in length, and as I said, we'll have time for a short question and answer after each of the sessions. This session is going to be a recorded session. You will receive access to the recording following the call and access to the presentation. After the seminar is finished, we will be sending to you a link for an online feedback survey, and I would appreciate if you take time to be able to fill that out and respond to it. It will help us be able to improve future web seminars with the information and feedback that you provide us. Without any further ado, I'd like to move forward to introducing John Muning of the University of Chicago Press. John's current title at University of Chicago Press is Publishing Technology Manager. He works in the Journal Division at the Press. He's had a very storied career in his time at UCP. He's taught several courses and has been responsible for the development of a series of tools that have helped UCP be able to advance through the ranks of how they handle copy editing, starting with electronic editing procedures and WordPerfect macros and migrating into more complex systems and more robust systems that are dealing with markup languages. John has also been involved in teaching classes at UCP in the School of General Studies and was co-author for the Math and Documentation chapters for the 15th edition of the Chicago Manual Style. John, without any further ado, I'll turn things over to you for your presentation regarding the manuscript editing process for journals at UCP.
Okay. So I guess before I get started talking about the process of manuscript editing in the journals division, let me tell you a little bit about the University of Chicago Press, just to give you some background. We are the largest American university press. We are small by commercial standards, but large as a university press. We're a not-for-profit, but of course that doesn't mean that 46 journals currently and approximately 250 books a year. On the journal side, that comes to about 46,000 journal pages a year. We have 300,000 DLIs registered with Crossref, 80,000 full-text articles online, and currently we have 43 of our 46 journals available in electronic form. The journals run from annuals to biweeklies, and from literary criticism to sciences like medicine and astronomy. So, at the University of Chicago Press and Journals, we've been doing electronic editing, using electronic tools to do copy editing since 1989. We originally set up a system using WordPerfect 5.1 for DOS, a venerable program for those of you who remember it. We were given a mandate to improve the workflow to make the downstream processes as efficient as possible, and ultimately the goal is to save time and money in production, and potentially to speed up copy editing, but certainly to try to avoid adding time. So when we started working in WordPerfect 5.1, we realized that there were some parts of the process that were annoying or took a tremendous amount of time and distracted our copy editors from the actual work of editing. So we created macros for tasks such as cleanup, footnote handling, querying, and coding, and we set strict procedures for how we wanted the manuscripts to be handled in-house, the condition that we wanted them to be handed off, and we created a training program for our in-house staff of copy editors in the journals division to learn how to use WordPerfect 5.1 to edit. That WordPerfect 5.1 based system went on for years very successfully, but around 1994, we got a mandate from one of our customers, the American Astronomical Society, to produce their journal using HTML, which is the standard that would be future-proof, that would be in an archival form that in 100 years could be looked at by historians of the discipline in order to, without being tied to any specific software, in order to see what was done in 1994 and on. So, and this was actually before journals were published on the web at all. At least as far as I know, the first journals on the web appeared in 1995. But even at the time when we were starting to set up the Astrophysical Journal, we realized that the single source model works first. And by that I mean we convert files from authors to HTML and then work in HTML, and we use those files, those marked up files, to create all of the, to create the print. At first it was only print, to typeset the manuscript, and to do whatever else needs to be done. And then we have a good archive of the finished work as well. So what were the benefits that we saw immediately, or that we hoped to achieve immediately? First, we wanted to speed up the production process. At first, at least, editing time increased, but the downstream processes, typesetting and later on web publishing, became much more efficient. We also realized when we were working with our vendors that if we asked them to give us HTML at the end of the typesetting process, that we had to do considerable cleanup or quality control in order to make sure that the HTML was actually right or that it was marked up properly. And that was actually very time-consuming. And by doing a single-source HTML process, we were able to avoid any back-end quality control. A benefit of both HTML and XML is that you can use those same files to publish simultaneously to multiple output streams. By that I mean you can use those files to do typesetting, to do web presentation, if you're in the books world, to create ebooks, etc. And also over time, if you need to republish or reuse the files for some other reason, to repurpose them, you have them in a form that can be reused as well. So let me tell you about the life of a manuscript in the journals division. First, of course, we have a peer review process, at the end of which the manuscripts are transmitted to the University of Chicago Press. We convert the files, copy edit them, they're typeset and printed, and we publish simultaneously or in many cases ahead of print on the web, and then we archive. So let me dive down and tell you a little bit about these processes in detail, focusing primarily on copy editing. After acceptance, manuscripts, we're using Aries Systems Editorial Manager system, and we have a process set up with them, an automated process where manuscripts are sent to our production system automatically and are ingested into our system, and the metadata is pulled into our production database. The manuscripts arrive here and are immediately converted to HTML or XML from the unstructured or quasi-structured files. So basically what we get from our authors is Word files for the most part. In some cases we get LaTeX as well. And originally we were converting the files ourselves using custom software, but now for almost all of this work, we're using offshore vendors to do the conversion to our doc type in HTML. And we have one GTD in HTML that we use. It's a custom doc type based on a standard from the 1990s. And all of our content, every article in every journal, whatever the discipline, is marked up front using that GTD. This gives us an incredible ease of maintenance and allows us to create one set of tools and training materials and processes to be used across all of the content the Journals Division publishes. By the time the manuscripts arrive at the computers of the copy editors, they're fully tagged valid HTML, so the copy editors don't have to worry about actually tagging the files. So, how do we do copy editing? Well, first of all, and this is probably obvious to all of you who are copy editors are closest to the actual content that we publish. In many cases, they're the only people in the publishing organization, at least, who read the manuscripts word for word and understand how the manuscript is put together in great detail. So they're in a great position to understand the structure as well. So our copy editors are working with the manuscript in HTML using a tool called arbortext editor, which is an HTML-aware editing program that we've customized, as I'll tell you about in a few minutes. We have a large pool of a group of in-house copy editors who are highly trained. They are trained in style for 6 months to more than a year in some cases. And we also train them to understand the HTML markup and how to use the editing tool arbortext to take advantage of the power of the tool. All of the changes to content and structure at any step in the editing process, and actually afterwards as well during typesetting for the stuff that we do in-house, are made in arbortext in an environment that validates the files mostly by copy editors. Every word and structure is accounted for in the HTML of the manuscript. Most of our copy editors, when we train them, we're working on paper or in the old WordPerfect 5.1 system back in the 90s, and the transition to using this tool actually went very smoothly. They adapted well. We didn't lose any editors along the way. Everybody got out of the box, doesn't know anything about the University of Chicago custom DTD. So we actually have developed over the course of the past 14 years a whole suite of tools. A whole suite of tools to facilitate the process of editing. The developers who are working on this came primarily from editorial and production and understood the requirements. And we also worked very closely with the managers and the staff of the two departments to try to make things as efficient as possible. So we created a suite of tools that actually take advantage of the fact that the files are in HTML to do context-sensitive searching, to do sophisticated automation of tasks. Ultimately, and this was our goal with WordPerfect too, we didn't want the copy editors to be distracted by the technology to the greatest extent possible. We wanted to let the editors worry about editing tasks and not to become geeks along the way. So this is a screenshot that shows you what editors see when they open up a document, just to give you a flavor of the arbortext tool. Copy editors, this right now is showing you the top or beginning of an article with the front matter marked up using our HTML. The copy editors have a choice when they work. They can see full tags, where they could see full start tags and end tags. They could see partial tags, which is what we're seeing right now, where the end tags are actually very small, or they can actually edit seeing no tags at all. Some of you may think that the editors would prefer not to see any tags, but in fact, most of our editors work in partial tag mode, even though they have a choice not to see the tags at all as they go. You'll also note that there's information about the article stored in the start tag for the entire article. That it contains the attribute values contain metadata about the article, but there also is metadata that is the content of elements in the front as well. For instance, the date of publication, the title, etc. The menu items along the top of the window there give access to the tools that we created. So what kinds of tools did we create? Well, I'll break it down for you, tell you about a few of the different classes of tools that we created along the way. First, there's metadata maintenance. We have a journal production database that contains information about all of the articles that we publish, as well as their status, where they are in the production process. We created tools that will update the information in the database. For instance, if a title is changed or an abstract is changed in the HTML, the corresponding record in the database is automatically updated at the end of every editing session. We also have tools for helping copy editors with markup tasks. Now, I said that the manuscripts are actually fully marked up when they arrive at their desks, but sometimes there are editing tasks that involve changing markup. For instance, there may have been problems with the conversion in terms of setting the attribute values for the journal, or it's possible that a figure was missing and they need to add the markup for a figure group, or that sections and subsections were not set at the right level and they need to be promoted or demoted relative to each other. So we created tools to handle those tasks. We also created tools to do verification and error trapping. Validation against an ETD will tell you whether or not you have a valid HTML file, but it won't tell you whether the content of the various elements is the content that actually belongs there. So we've written some tools to verify that if you have an element that's supposed to contain a date, that the content of that element actually is a date, that figure numbers actually are numbers, that sort of thing. We also, and these tools actually will report back to the copy editors when problems are identified, and in some cases will not let the copy editor push the manuscript to the next stage in the process. Additionally, we've created tools for doing redlining, which is showing the author the changes that are made to the manuscript. Arbortext comes with tools to track what you do as you edit, but oddly enough, it doesn't actually give you a convenient way to show those changes in a printout. So we had to create, to customize a way of printing out a good redlined manuscripts that contain a lot of math, and the tools out of the box did not have any way to identify or flag changes in math, so we had to create a way for that to be done. One big tool that we wrote, and I don't mean to scare you with the word auto-redaction, but we created a tool called Edit Prep. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with this pressure. We've felt a lot of pressure to increase productivity among copy editors. We feel very strongly that we don't want that to go along with diminishing quality. So we've created some tools that we've actually built so that copy editors themselves can have control over, to automate the imposition of rules of editorial style on the manuscript. We wrote this tool called Edit Prep so that the copy editors have a choice, rule by rule, whether to make a change silently, to flag it using redlining, or to stick in a comment to say, something along the lines of, we've changed this here, is this okay? So that for any given rule, the copy editors or the people who are maintaining the rules within the copy editing group can control the behavior of the program with regards to the way that it communicates the information back. As I said, the editorial staff defines and maintains the rules. The rules are actually maintained in an XML file using a doc type that we created. Some of the groups here, the editing groups, actually have created hundreds of rules. On the next page, you'll see an example of what the rules look like. This just shows you the rules for changing capital upon to on. If the word kill, T-I-L-L, occurs, it will be changed automatically to until. You'll see in the start tags for the rules that there's a choice of whether or not the change will be redlined. In all of these cases, it's yes. So the copy editor can vet the changes that are made by the tool. If it said no, then the changes would be made silently. These are 4 rules out of the 850 that our astronomy group created. We also created tools to facilitate inserting links in our XML files. Our files are used, as I said, we publish almost all of our journals electronically, and so we want to have the automatic creation of links in our electronic journals from the source files. So we have various kinds of linking. Internal linking are links from calls to tables and call-outs for tables and figures and sections to the actual object that they're referring to. Display formulas as well. We do some sidebars even that have IDs and references to those IDs. We have tools that automatically use pattern matching to automatically insert the correct markup for those objects. Also, and this is a very time-consuming, potentially very time-consuming editing task, we have tools to automate the insertion of markup for author date references and to work with numbered reference style renumbering and making sure that they're numbered properly across figures and tables as well. As far as external links go, we have tools that use pattern matching for identifying email addresses and web links, and then they'll also, for the web links, at least let you check to make sure that it's pointing at a valid web address and to pop the website up for you to look at it before you publish without having to cut and paste into your browser window. And there are some types of links to databases like GenBank or Mendelian Inheritance of Man that we know the pattern of those and we insert those automatically. And then finally, we have tools for doing bibliographic linking to data system, PubMed, and we feed back to the editors on the success of that type of linking, as I'll show you in the next slide. If you'll see in the start tag for these references here that there's a lot of metadata about the references. There's a DLI and what we call a bib code. That's a link that goes to the Astrophysical Data Service. If the linking is, if those identifiers are retrieved from the databases successfully, our tool automatically turns the reference green. That actually is an indication to the copy editor that the information in the reference is correct, or at least correct enough to make the link work. We also have tools for dealing with mathematics, complex content like mathematics and tables. Arbortext comes with a WYSIWYG math editor, which our copy editors use, but we also have some math-related tasks that can't be achieved with that editor. So our copy editors, there are some things, for instance, that authors may have put in math that don't need to be in math. So we have to take the math out. We call that demathing, and the inverse of that, remathing. And then also, we felt the need to enable search and replace within math through entire articles. For instance, if you had a vector that had an arrow over an italic letter and you wanted to make it bold italic and get rid of the arrow, we wanted to be able to do that with one search and replace operation rather than having to open each equation. You could have hundreds of equations with this in an article. We wanted to provide a way to do that with one search and replace. And so we have something called math tag mode that makes that possible. As far as tables go, there also is an editor built into Arbortext for dealing with tables. But we've created some tools to help with time-consuming problems having to do with alignment rules, adding ellipses, doubling up or undoubling tables, joining and separating columns that contain data with certain patterns. Sometimes authors will split value plus or minus value into 3 columns and you need them in one, cell shading, and various other table-related functions. Okay, so those are the tools that we've created to facilitate copy editing. But copy editing is done and you're ready to actually typeset, we've integrated the push from the typesetting system, from the copy editing environment into the typesetting system as well. So our copy editors choose a menu item in arbortext. We have a menu called Penta. Penta is our typesetting system. To send the manuscript to Penta, and the pages, it's a batch typesetting system, and the pages more or less correctly typeset pop up back on the user's desk within a minute or two for them to check. And then if something's wrong, we have some tools that allow our copy editors to insert instructions to the typesetting system to fix minor problems, to tweak. We also use external vendors to take our HTML and do pages as well. If that's the case, then whatever changes they make during the proof process have to be entered by them into the HTML before it's returned to us. And finally, at the end of the typesetting process, we get print and web-optimized PDF, EPS, encapsulated PostScript files, images for math and tables, which we use in our electronic journals. And of course, because we used it to create the typeset files, we have the source HTML reflecting all the changes from the proof process as well. As far as web publishing goes, we use the Adapon Systems Literatum platform. We worked with them so that they would be able to take UCP HTML or NLM XML from us. We're currently in the process of migrating all of our internal processes to NLM XML. And their system serves, we use their system to serve PDF and HTML proof to authors. We believe actually that it's a good thing for authors to see their work in whatever format it's going to be presented in, so we present HTML to them as well to check. They have a system for allowing you to stage and do quality control before going live, and they host our electronic journal. So what have we learned from all of this stuff that I've just described? First, copy editors have to learn to be flexible. They have to be flexible because technology is changing, and this has led to some degree, even though we tried to allow them to focus on editing, it's led to some blurring of traditional roles. As I said, they send their manuscripts to the typesetting system, so they're serving a little bit as typesetters. They may be checking proof at the same time that authors do, so they're serving a bit as web producers. And if they develop, if they have the aptitude and inclination, they can take advantage of the arbortext editing environment to write their own macros, and to that degree they actually can wear the hat of a programmer as well. Some copy editors are uncomfortable with the new tasks, others thrive, but everybody can learn it. We've also learned that it's a good idea to use standards like HTML and XML as far upstream in your process as possible to avoid quality control problems as I described earlier. But it also is important to note that even standards-based solutions will eventually become obsolete. There's no such thing really as future-proof. When we started working with HTML, we thought that it was going to be sort of set in stone and that it was the standard that would last forever, and 2 or 3 years later XML came out, and it actually is a fair amount of work to retool and update legacy systems to go from using HTML to XML. We're in the process of doing that right now, which leads to the last item, which is to work with your entire workflow in modules. We didn't want to change everything all at the same time, blow up our editing system and our web hosting at the same time. So we made sure that the hosting choice that we made Adapon, that they would be able to take either our HTML or XML. so that we could, in a more thoughtful and I won't say leisurely, but we wouldn't have to do every journal all at the same time, but we could make the transition fairly easily because we sectioned off the web hosting, just as an example. It also, finally, is the case that whether you build or buy, customization and integration take time and energy. They are work, but so is outsourcing. So, and with that, I will pass control back to, actually, I guess it's question time, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you very much for that. And we do have some interesting questions that have come up from the group. I'm going to start really at the front end of the process with any questions. The first of these has to do with the conversion process and a query about why UCP elected to go through to a conversion to get to the HTML environment and then edit, rather than to go the other way around.
Well, first of all, the working's a good way. We did it for the reasons that I said. It actually helped us in terms of the speed. We worked with our typesetting vendor in the mid-90s to take very complex copy, math and tables. Our copy editors were able to prepare the HTML files in a way that would make them flow into the system very efficiently and with much less intervention from the typesetting vendor that we had before. And we actually wound up getting a lot of time back in our production process.
The global impact that you saw as a benefit coming through from the switch to the HTML environment, right?
Right. So there was time and money, but also as we went, we developed a lot of efficiencies in the copy editing process, taking advantage of the fact that we had the structure in the files already, to make sure that the markup was in there properly, not to have to look at the files when they came back, to make sure that we had what we needed to do web publishing as well, which was not an easy task when we were doing that.
Sure. With regard to the conversion process, most of the documents you get in are either Word documents or LaTeX documents, and you're using an offshore vendor for going through to be able to handle that process. Is the tagging all done by the offshore vendor in order to be able to have fully marked up HTML files back in your possession? And what is the time span that's associated with that process?
Yes, they are actually producing fully marked up HTML files that are valid against our DTD, and we FTP PDF files and or Word files, depending on whether or not they're keying. In some cases, we only have PDF. We give them the author's original files, and along with page images, and they turn them over within a few days at the most.
And lastly, before we move to the next session, I believe you had indicated that all or most of all your editors are in-house copy editors. And the approach you described is one that's very robust and very, very thorough. Do you believe that the approach that you've built at UCP is one that would be applicable to a workflow in which the copy editors are mainly freelancers?
I think that the workflow that I described would be problematic exactly the way that I described. The freelancers that we use now are actually mostly ex-employees who are able to access our system remotely to edit the manuscripts using exactly the same processes that I described for the manuscripts that are in this workflow. But we also do have some journals where work is freelanced in Word and converted after and then checked in Epic by production editors. It's an exceptional workflow. You know, it's a workflow that is an exception for us, but we do actually do that as well, especially for handling the ebb and flow of content. You know, when we have a lot.
That's very good. Thank you very much. The next speakers are going to be Michael Haskell and Scott Beatty. I'll give you a little bit of background for them. Michael is a manuscript editor, and he's the electronic manuscript administrator at Columbia University Press. He's been there since 2002. His department's responsible for supervising a significant amount of book-length academic titles each year, over 150. And he's been involved in working on a project in collaboration with Scott Beatty and others. Scott is currently with Oxford University Press as CMS project analyst, data analyst. The work that he's going to be talking about today with Michael is work that was done collaboratively at CUP. I'll turn it over to you guys to step through your presentation. There's actually going to be some live interaction here. They're going to demonstrate the system, so the screen will look a little different than what you saw with the preceding presentation.
Thank you. And John, thanks for your portion of the presentation. Scott and I, for our portion, are going to demonstrate a word-based editing system that was first developed for Columbia University Press in 2002. And specifically, we're going to talk about the 3.0 upgrade that we made to this system in 2008. The editing system is the basis for our copy editing workflow at Columbia, and it's a tool we use to transform our content into XML. I'll start with a few words about CUP and the history of the editing system, then give you an introduction to some of its core features. We'll then address a few specific reasons for this upgrade and give a live demonstration in which we'll process a dummy manuscript before ending with a few thoughts on remaining challenges and future directions. So an important idea to keep in mind throughout this presentation is that what we sought to do in the upgrade was more than just improving the system for copy editing. We took the upgrade as an opportunity to look at our publishing workflow as a whole, because the technology used in the editing phase has implications both forward and backward in the publication process. And while we don't have time to go into too much detail here, our goal was to create a new model for the publishing program that's driven by the content and not limited by the method of production. So just as a bit of background, CUP is the fourth oldest university press in the country, first established in 1893. We publish about 160 new titles a year, that's all books. Many of them are edited in-house, or an in-house production editor will supervise a freelance manuscript editor. And almost all of the books are designed in-house. So as a result, the editing workflow at Columbia has to be flexible enough to incorporate freelance editors and to ensure the smooth transmission of the data to an in-house designer for typesetting and design. The main complication in this actually comes from one of Columbia's strengths, which is the diversity of our publishing program. As an example, a few of the fields that we publish in are Asian studies, biological sciences, business, Middle Eastern studies, neuroscience, and social work. So a standardized workflow has to be able to accommodate the needs of all of these different kinds of books. When I started at Columbia in 2002, the manuscript editorial department was using Xywrite for editing, and then transmitting essentially plain text files to design and production. These files would have dummy character strings for all non-ASCII characters, and then the comps and designers would have to search for those and replace them. Anything much more complicated than N dashes or M dashes or curly quotes, such as Greek or most Arabic or Asian diacritics, essentially had to be treated as art and set by hand from an example. But even in those Bronze Age times, it was clear that there had to be a better system. So the press began to look at XML as the data type of the future and sought a workflow that would accommodate it. At the same time, we switched to Word for editing because of its adaptability and, let's face it, its ubiquity. But the most important aspect of the change was contracting with an outside vendor to customize Word and make it work the way we wanted it to, and produce XML that could flow smoothly into design and production. So I'm going to describe briefly, and mainly for the copy editors out there, some aspects of the Word editing system and the XML workflow, which is still fairly similar now, after this upgrade, to the form and function they had when we initially developed them. Then Scott's going to describe what we found could be improved and what he and I did to upgrade the system. So Columbia's word editing system uses a series of Visual Basic macros and templates. These are accessed through Word and attached as add-ins. The first of these is highlighted on the slide you see now. It's called Initial Prep, and it sets the stage for making the editor's job easier and faster through the remainder of the copy editing process. And I think John mentioned something similar in his talk. Initial Prep takes the raw Word files from the author and cleans them up so that the editor can focus on editing and coding, not worrying about whether hyphens between numbers need to be converted to end dashes or whether string quotes need to be made curly. It also extracts the author's embedded notes and saves them out in a separate notes file, as you'll see during our demonstration a little later. That allows for dynamic management of the notes between the two files. And Initial Prep is always run by an in-house editor, so freelance editors will only receive pre-treated files. Depending on the options selected, Initial Prep will also condense multiple spaces, tabs, and paragraph marks to single instances, delete discretionary hyphens and embedded comments, convert typewriter quotes to smart quotes, convert hyphens between numbers to end dashes, and convert the extracted notes to back notes if they're eventually going to be set at the back of the book, or leave them styled as endnotes or footnotes. But most important, what Initial Prep does is attach CUP styles as the global template for all the documents it cleans up. CUP styles is a template, and it's the core of the editing system. In addition to various commands and macros, it contains all of the text styles that the editor will use in coding the book. So Initial Prep associates a copy of CUP styles with each project, so that when one of the manuscript files is opened, either in-house or by a freelance editor, CUP's editing styles are already available to them. The template adapts Word's own style system and displays the text in such a way so as to visually suggest each element's role in the printed book, while also coding that element in Word's underlying XML format. The style text, as hopefully you can see there, resembles the final form it's going to have in the printed book, so that the author can see the relationship among text elements when reviewing the editing. Also, the styles available in CUP styles are the only ones that our DTD will recognize as valid when the final manuscript is later converted to XML and is parsed for validity, which I'll demonstrate. This is an example of how the workflow is designed first to produce valid XML that the designer can confidently import, and second, to streamline the editing to design transition so that the XML carries as much information as possible to the designer. As this slide and the next one hint at, there are a lot of styles available, and these are broken down with various positional indicators so that the XML itself, after the Word files are converted, will give the designer all the information the editor wants to convey about how each text element relates to the others, to the chapter, to the book as a whole. For the editor, the process of applying these styles needs to be as easy as possible. So they're available in an alphabetic list from Word's style window, or from a series of toolbars that are accessed through a new menu on the menu bar. This slide, in particular, looks kind of busy because I wanted to show the range of styling options available and how they're organized. An editor obviously would only need one toolbar in place at any given time. And I should also note that I've written some fairly extensive documentation that gets into all the nuts and bolts of all aspects of the editing system. Appropriate sections of this are sent out to all the freelance editors we use so that hopefully they can do most of their troubleshooting themselves, but a lot of it just remains with me. So, when we first developed the system in 2002, it included many of the theme workflow. These included a markup system that did not effectively communicate document structure to the designer, the lack of a validation step between copy editing and design, which allowed errors to sneak in, and those could prevent files from being loaded directly into InDesign, which is the typesetting application CUP uses. And there was also a limited library of entities representing non-ASCII characters. So many of these would require individual workarounds, which would remove projects from an efficient and unified workflow. So responding to these shortcomings became the goal for the system upgrade. And Scott is now going to speak to some of those issues more specifically.
Thank you, Michael. One of the most important things we wanted to accomplish with the system upgrade was to ensure that the document structure was being effectively communicated to the designers so that they can then leverage that structure in InDesign. This would allow for a far more efficient design process by enabling designers to define a style once and then apply it automatically to every instance of that style called out in the XML. To achieve this, changes were made to CUP's custom XML data model, making it more consistent, concise, and comprehensive. Part of this meant that only the style codes that were approved by Manuscript editorial and design would be passed along in the CUP XML, which now had to be validated against the DTD. And for those non-technical folks out there, a DTD is just a set of rules used to enforce the structure of XML documents. This was a vast improvement over the old system, which allowed styles to be used inconsistently and in some cases incorrectly, leading to time-consuming back and forth between the editor and the designer. Adding a validation step also assured that other problems in the XML could be identified before the manuscript left the copy editing stage. This meant that these problems could be discovered before they caused an error in InDesign, thus increasing the overall efficiency of the process. Editors are now required to validate files against the CUP DTD before passing them on to design. And while the technical nature of this step is fairly straightforward, the challenge was getting buy-in from the department to take the time to learn new and, for some, intimidating software, but I'll let Michael speak to this in a little bit more detail later in our presentation. The third, and probably most crucial aspect of the system upgrade, was the management of special characters in a way that was not constrained by character entities. The original system used coded representations of characters, known as entities, to pass special characters to design for typesetting. This approach had several key drawbacks. Each entity had to be specifically defined in the DTD, so editors were limited to a list of a few hundred entities that had been created for them. As a result, if the appropriate entity couldn't be found, some editors would create new entities on the fly, thinking, or hoping, that they would translate to actual characters when passed to design. Not only would these rogue entities not be translated properly by InDesign, but they would cause errors that would prevent the document from even being opened by the designer, leading again to process breakdowns and inefficiencies. The biggest consequence of this entity-based system, however, was that many manuscripts had to be treated on an individual basis, separate from the ongoing workflow, because the special characters required for that manuscript could not be represented by the available list of entities. This meant that manuscript editors, designers, and comps had to spend time worrying about identifying and coming up with workarounds to allow for specific characters rather than focusing on adding value to the manuscript project through actual editing, design, and composition. In short, handling special characters in this way wasted the time of skilled workers to the detriment of the product. The solution was to begin using Unicode to represent special characters. Essentially, this meant inserting the special characters directly into the manuscript. This leveraged the fact that Unicode is a word-based application and allows for the insertion of over 50,000 special characters directly into the text when using a sufficiently robust font, such as Arial Unicode MS, which is prepackaged with Word. Through the modifications we made to the conversion routine, these characters were seamlessly passed to the XML, which is also Unicode-based. This allows editors to concentrate on editing and designers on designing. Now no one needs to spend time figuring out how to make sure that a T with an underdot or an IN or a Hamza is accurately passed on to a typesetter. So, as you can see in this example, the original system required that special characters in the word Quran, for instance, be represented with entities, whereas in the new system, special characters can be entered directly into the text. Okay, that wraps up the reasons for the upgrade. So Michael will now give a demonstration.
See me run these routines as if I were editing directly in front of you. So I've got a dummy file here that's going to stand in for a manuscript, and I simply attach as an add-in our initial prep, and I tell it that it's safe to run. Then you just set up initial prep to run. It copies in CUP styles I mentioned and establishes that as the basis for the entire editing project. And I have to find it, of course. And once that's attached, the options that initial prep can run are part of CUP styles. They're inherent in there. So it brings up this list. I'm just going to let it go with what it has there. But you can see all the various things it can do, extracting the notes, deleting blanks, etc. So you simply run it. For a dummy file like this, it shouldn't notes from this file. So we'll have two files in the output instead of one. Very good. And it's created a file prep folder where everything was the output if we were running this on an entire directory. And you can see that it's copied CUP styles into that. And you can see now that it's set X indented text as the default style for everything in here. So I can just go in as the editor and start applying the styles that are needed as I edit. I can do this first. I can do it after I edit. It really doesn't matter, and it's up to the individual editors, whatever that person is most comfortable with. You can see some special characters in there. And then you can also see, here's the notes file, which is already styled as backnotes because we told it which kind of notes we wanted it to establish. So, in order to convert to XML, we just use Word and Word's ability to save files out as different types. So I just save these Word documents as XML files, which Word can handle easily, and then save. You do end up having to save each individual file in a project, which is one of the things we'll get into later, something that we'd like to have a little more automated than it currently is. So we've saved it out as XML. Now, in order to strip out Word programming sort of dump that clogs up the XML, Scott wrote an XSLT, it's a transform. We apply that to the raw XML folder that we made, which, if you'll bear with me, I'll locate for you. Find it there, just make a project, and then we just tell it to transform this with what we call diamond cutter. I'm not even sure why we call it that now. And it'll run through every file that's in that directory, and you can actually see it run the transformation, and then it'll open them up. Now, you can see here how the style codes are actually transformed into tags in the XML. When I applied chapter number, chapter title, chapter opening paragraph, and then the regular indented text. So I'm going to close these and show you how we would then validate the XML. Same process. You just get the folder that the transformed XML is in, and we validate it against Columbia's own DTB, which we altered and updated as part of all of this. And it's successful. So the system, amazingly enough, actually works. So that's it for the demonstration. Scott's going to talk a little bit about some remaining issues and steps that we have thought about for the future with this sort of system.
Thanks, Michael. That was very brilliant of you, and you did it very well. So although significant improvements were made to the editing system in the last upgrade, there's still some remaining issues that are worth mentioning. The first is the efficiency of the system itself. And as you can see in the demonstration, there are still steps that require manual saving, moving, and naming of files. In subsequent versions of the editing system, it would be nice to automate these processes. The system also involves using XML editing software. That was the Oxygen software that we showed you. And while it's only used for a few basic functions, it can be intimidating for new users and adds an extra step to the process. It would be beneficial to investigate alternatives for the transformation and validation steps of the process, and to identify an XML editing environment that might provide a slightly more user-friendly experience.
It's Michael again. I just want to say that, in a way, we discovered that the most difficult part of the upgrade, since, after all, this is publishing, was getting everyone to feel comfortable with the change. Like most manuscript editing departments, Columbia uses many freelance editors, and their comfort level and their willingness to change old habits varies very widely. So understanding which pieces of the system need to be released to them and limiting the change as much as possible to in-house workflows is an important part of any upgrade like this. Moreover, it's important to remember that while the changes made in this upgrade and in the editing system most directly concern manuscript editorial, they're also aimed at creating an efficient press-wide workflow. Therefore, it's crucial to get everyone, from acquiring editors and editorial assistants all the way through to designers and compositors on board and understanding the nature of the system, the technology involved, and its purpose. For example, editorial assistants need to make authors understand the value of using a Unicode-based font to insert special characters. And they also need to be aware of which kinds of manuscripts need special inspection for those characters. The goal, after all, is to unify and streamline the workflow and the data transfer, starting with the author and moving forward all the way to marketing and the various deliverables. And that's a lot of people to bring on board. So that does it for our presentation. We hope you enjoyed it, and we also want you to feel free to email us with any questions that may have come up during this if they're not covered in the question and answer session. And we just want to thank you all very much for attending.
Thank you very much, Michael and Scott. It was a very interesting presentation, and I think that there were a couple of very good steps that you had demonstrated during the course of this process. I'm familiar to folks who focus on the Word portion of this first, and then talk with you a little bit about the XML portion. And some of this is based upon what may have been a resource-related issue in your organization when you were looking at taking on this project, and some of it may have been what you felt was going to be the most effective use of being able to work with your teams, as you described at the tail end of the session. When CUP started this, you had worked with an outside vendor to go through to customize Word.
Right.
Did you consider tackling that yourself? And what was the primary driver for being able to find that outside vendor?
I wasn't actually involved in the original establishing of the system. So I'm not positive whether they thought about doing it in-house. I think the design of it was essentially done in-house, conceptually. And they contacted with someone basically for the programming expertise. Because as far as I know at the time, there wouldn't have been a programmer at the Pratt at the time to take on something like that.
Okay, that makes perfect sense, and that's not an uncommon phenomenon among publishers who are relatively small size. I think UCT, because of the volume of work they have, can be very much characterized as a large press, a large publisher. And the situation that many smaller publishers have is that they're dealing with many fewer pages that would go through the course of the year. And a natural spin-off that would come from that is that they may not have resources to be able to invest in taking on all of these development tasks and developing new tools. So if you were a very small publisher and you had in the neighborhood of 500 pages per year to 1,000 pages per year that you were responsible for producing, what would you say would be the value of going down the HTML, XML system path to help with copyediting?
Well, I think that, for us at least, the major value was in the unification of the workflow. So that individual projects no longer automatically had to be treated specially, but we tried to enfold everything into one workflow. If, you're publishing a 500-page book per year, maybe it's not as worth it, unless you look farther downstream and can identify uses for that XML. We didn't really get into it, but there's a lot you can do in terms of marketing, revenue streams, and even just getting some of your content out there on the internet, making your name known. That can be done once you have some robust XML.
That makes perfect sense. And it also leads to tie-in with what you were talking about with regard to the standardization of your systems overall to be able to streamline workflows. Because it does mean that you can keep things coordinated between the different segments of the production process. I have a question for you about how you go about training freelancers at CUP. You mentioned that you use quite a bit of freelance support to be able to handle your work. Is that done remotely, or is that done through bringing folks into the university to get familiar with the tools and systems that you're going to ask them to use?
Oh, no, it's done remotely. I don't think, maybe one freelancer has actually come in to watch a demonstration, and a lot of it ends up being sort of one-on-one with me if a freelancer has any questions. Part of the reason for sticking with Word in this case is just that so many people have it, and it's become a standard for a lot of freelance editors. So while we had to get some people to upgrade even from Word 2000 or Word 97 to Word 2003, which is already out of date, the fact that people had Word and I could provide them with documentation that's going to look like what they're seeing on their screen, made its adoption pretty painless across the board. A few people needed a little extra coaching, but we tried to keep the real technical changes to the in-house workflow so that an editor who doesn't at least use the styling in Word can pretty much jump right in and begin editing. We didn't want the freelance editors to have to spend their time, which we're paying for, learning a new system. We wanted them editing.
That makes a whole lot of sense because the ubiquity of Word does make it an easy platform for folks to be able to train or learn remotely from. In the evolution of the process with the styles that were involved there, it's also the case that I think that it's easy to be able to have your editors and others who are familiar with the style for the publications and what they would want to see, be able to work with the Word environment. And I can see where the system that you've developed allows for a fair amount of flexibility there. But I'd be interested in understanding a little bit more about the process by which those different coding levels were determined. In your example, you had 3 levels of dialogue that were showing up in the sample that you had displayed. Is it pure style-based associated with that? Is there a different level of meaning? Is it something that may vary from editor to editor associated with your publications?
Well, hopefully it won't vary from editor to editor, because what we're trying to do is communicate to the designer and to the compositor what each element does.
Right.
So, for example, with the dialogue or with a list, we're saying, is it the initial paragraph? Is it the same speaker continuing with a new paragraph of the same speech? Is it a new speaker in the middle of the dialogue? Is it the last paragraph of dialogue before we move on to something else? So all of that is actually communicated in the code that comes out in the XML. So it's really the development of the style list is kind of a combination of legacy, of just things we developed over the years that we knew were useful for our books, and then, especially with this upgrade, necessity, how to get that communication to be clearer and more obvious to the designer, so that the designer never has to come to the production editor and say, how does this work? Where does this fit in? What does this mean? We've given all of that information already.
That also makes perfect sense, and it does show that there's a clear benefit to the designers and the production process that's downstream for you. I'm just going to ask one more specific question with regard to the CUP process, and then I'm going to move to bouncing back and forth between what John had presented earlier and what you gentlemen had just shared with us. What you're doing in terms of the CUP process has focused largely upon the style for the publication, and you've done some cleanup associated with the document. One of the things that we haven't heard too much of through the process, although John had mentioned about doing an auto-prep piece within the UCP system, was the actual tackling of grammar and vocabulary inside of these articles. Can you speak to that a bit about the tools that you have deployed for being able to assist copy editors who may be helping with that grammar and vocabulary aspect of the work that they need to perform?
Well, I'm not going to try and write any scripts that are going to show a copy editor how to edit for grammar and vocabulary. That's something we really rely on, having a stable of highly skilled workers out there that we know. And so I'd rather have the technological aspect leave the editor with that time to edit, to bring that expertise to bear, because that's really the value that a good copy editor is going to add to a project. And that's a skill set that the editor will already have. So we don't really have anything that's checking for grammar, for vocabulary, anything like that. The only thing along those lines would be just using the styles to indicate how a manuscript fits together, how the pieces of it interact with one another.
That makes very good sense. John, I have a couple questions for you regarding the UCP system. There are some questions that have come forward about what kind of cost involvement was to set up a system like the arbortext system that you had described?
What the cost was? You know, at this point, since we actually built the system in the mid-90s initially and it's evolved since then, it's very difficult for us to actually come up with a single number for you. We do have dedicated technical staff at the press, and that really was the main cost. Arbortext is, you know, more expensive than Microsoft Word, but you know, and we have to pay for the license for the software. But all of the customization that was done by the technical staff, and in order to really put to assign cost to that, you would have to look back at all of the work that was done over all the years, which wasn't tracked in a way that would make that possible.
So that makes sense. You did mention that the freelancers that you have that are working outside were former employees, typically, for the university. Do they have to purchase arbortext, or are they logging in to be able to use your system through VPN or something?
The way that it works actually is the arbortext system is running on a Unix server, and our copy editors are accessing it via emulation on their Windows desktops or their Macs, so that they actually are connecting to our servers and using one copy of the software with multiple licenses. This actually gives us a lot of efficiency in being able to maintain the tools. We don't have to change tools on people's desktops or push out templates or whatever to make sure that they're working properly. We change them in the change the code in the central place, and all the users who are accessing the program are getting it from the same copy or instance of the program on our service.
Sure. And I can see where there would be considerable efficiencies with that. How many copy editors do you have that are handling the current volume that you're doing? I believe you have reported somewhere in the neighborhood of 46,000 pages per year.
Right now, I think we have somewhere in the vicinity, I don't know the exact number, about 45 in-house copy editors in the journals division.
And are you taking a look at utilizing the same system with regard to your books production work?
We haven't actually talked about that much. We have done a couple of projects. We've worked together on a couple of projects, mostly reference, to take advantage of some of the stuff that we're doing, but by and large, the two operations have been separate.
Yeah. And I can see where, if you would take a look at the first set of books that you may want to consider starting with, reference types of works would make very good sense because of the repurposing that Michael had talked about previously. It might be of value even to a smaller publisher.
Exactly. Repurposing and parallel publishing, being able to go to e-book or electronic publication at the same time that you do print.
Right. I'm going to bring up two topics now. The first is going to be the migration path, where you were looking at going to an XML format, John, from SGML. And I think it's pretty clear for everybody that UCP had started on this process at a time when HTML and HTML tools were readily available, and XML came along later. Are you looking at making a complete migration to the NLM XML, or are you looking at using this as an output format and still utilizing your HTML structure and your arbortext systems to handle the editing in-house?
So we're actually retooling our entire system to use NLM XML, Journal Publishing XML natively.
Okay.
We're going to be moving journals over. We're going to redo the typesetting system, the editing environment, make sure that we have analogous functionality in all of the pieces moving forward. Although we have a little bit of room, space to do that. It's not like arbortext. Arbortext, the tool, will handle NLM XML or it will handle UCP XML. So we don't have to buy any new software. It's all a question of moving the in-house development of the tools and making sure that we have everything in place. Which is why I was talking about the modules at the end of the presentation. We already know our vendors can handle either either format so we can make the transition journal by journal without worrying that we would be able to get print or online publishing from it.
Just a quick question related to the NLN Journal Publishing DTD for Michael and for Scott. Have you looked at the possibility of utilizing that DTD? Because I've heard that a lot in other forums or other conversations.
Yeah, I think there's certainly advantages to using standards-based, DGDs and other things. I think in the case of Columbia, though, because we had an in-house tagging system that was essentially working for the process that we have in place, we briefly investigated using a standards-based system like TEI, but it just turned out that the complexities involved in making that transition and the fact that within CUP, most of the markup is actually, not the markup itself, but the styling of the text in Word is being done by the copy editors themselves. They would have to become, extremely well-versed in the TEI data model, and that just seemed like probably too large of a hurdle for them at this point.
Especially with the number of freelance editors that we use. We just can't ask them to learn a whole new language.
Right. Okay. That also makes very good sense. Let's move on to talk about proofing a little bit, because intrinsic to the process of being able to handle the publications that you have is that you're getting in materials from authors, and you're going through an editing phase. You're going through a phase in which you're either sending to a designer or you're sending to a typesetting house. And I assume that what's being received by authors are proofs after that composition step has taken place. How do you go through and handle the process of being able to incorporate proofs into the changes to the proofs into the XML that you've created through these two mechanisms?
Is it for us?
It's for either and both.
Well, the next generation of the software suite that InDesign's a part of actually allows for dynamic updating of the underlying XML as you're working in the application. So the proofs will go to the author. Usually we send them PDFs. They come back to say me, marked up by hand by the author. I approve or set the various changes and then give those physically to the compositor. And then, so as the compositor makes the changes, the underlying XML in the application would be updated by those changes that the compositor makes.
Okay, so if you would, then your archive piece would be the XML that is from the composition engine or composition system.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
And for us, as I said, we use a single source model, so the SQL that is being copy edited is the SQL that's being fed into the typesetting system, and changes are made back through arbortext in the same files that the copy editors were editing when there are changes at proof stage for all the articles that we typeset in-house, which is well over 50% of the pages that we do still. For the stuff that we do externally with external compositors, we expect them to be working with our files in the format that we supply them, and we expect for them to make their changes in the files and to supply us with valid SQL or XML. We're actually getting, for some of these, we're actually getting NLM XML back from the compositors just to be sure that all of our other downstream processes will work. That they will give us exactly what we need back out of their system, reflecting the changes, but also following the rules.
One of the things that several of our audiences noticed during the course of the presentations is that there has not been specific mention of proofreading through either of the presentations. Would you care to say a word about what is incorporated in the process that you're using that would be either direct proofreading or the analogous to the proofreading step that traditionally has taken place in these production systems?
In the journal division at UCP, we create proof as PDF and we serve the proof to authors. We have internal quality control. It's usually the copy editor or somebody else in the editing group who will check the proof also. We have a couple of rounds, first pages, second pages, internally. At the same time, via secure web server, authors and journal offices are able to download proof, and alternatively also the HTML rendering of the manuscript in order to do proofreading of the online presentation. And they feed changes back to us, and they're entered into the HTML, and the changes are reflected in the next round.
Our process is essentially the same except for the HTML step. And the copy editor sort of, or the production editor, who maybe edits the manuscript, maybe supervise a freelance editor, is essentially the gatekeeper for changes the author seeks to make and proof, and the one who runs in-house quality control on the proofs.
Right.
Question for you at Columbia with regard to Word. The demonstration that you had used was with Word 2003. Are you looking at Word 2007, and is your current system compatible with Word 2007?
That's a complicated question, actually. We are looking less at it than sort of near it. I've done some experimenting with it. I need to do a little more. What I notice with Office products, Word products, it takes a while for them to really spread out in the marketplace. We're not going to be seeing authors and freelance editors all switching over to the next platform immediately. When we made this change, people were still using Word 97. So I'm not too worried yet about being left behind by it. We can definitely process files created in Word 2007 and bring them into our workflow. The real question is just whether editors are going to be adopting it. And so far, I haven't had a single freelance editor who wants to. No one in-house wants to. Authorial review can be done in it without a problem. So at the moment, I'm not too worried. And with Microsoft, they might have Word 2010 out in a couple of weeks, and you never know what they're going to do.
Right. But this is definitely a case where editors have to be somewhat flexible, because freelancers may be required to work in Word 2007.
It may come to that. My guess is, well, at least so far, I haven't seen the market pushing them to do so from any other of the publishers that they work for. And we, at least compared to a lot of the other publishers that our editors work for. So I haven't heard anything coming back from them about it.
Okay. Since we're on the topic of dealing with Word, and you're going from Word styles at Columbia into XML, I know, Scott, you have invested time and energy to go through to create a diamond cutter in order to be able to do the translation. Is there current XSL support at Columbia, and are you looking to do more with that XML transformation path than you've currently done?
Right. I will, I did write that style sheet, but I will let Michael address the question because not being at Columbia anymore, I'm not completely sure what kinds of technical support are in place.
So far, Scott must have done a really good job because we haven't needed any technical support on it. There are a couple of features that the unkind would call bugs, I suppose, that at some point I'd like to have fixed, but they're not any sort of big deal. They don't interfere with the workflow at all. So I'm essentially our tech support on it at this point. I'm wearing many hats.
Okay. But the system is robust enough, it appears, to be able to support some variations associated with the workflow that you have, to be able to deal with freelance editors, easy training for them, and then the ability to be able to have a standard product that goes to your designers at this point.
Indeed. And again, I don't want the freelance editors to ever have to think XSLT or transform or XML. I just want them editing and styling manuscripts.
Sure.
So in-house, it has proved to be robust enough to handle anything that was thrown at it, which is a really great thing. We're pretty happy with it so far.
Okay. Can I ask a question? How often do the files coming through the transform, how often are they not valid? The one that you used is valid.
Right. It's pretty rare, and it's usually where freelance editors say has spanned 2 paragraphs with a character style, for example, or has left something unstyled, or what you get a lot, actually, are sort of legacy styles left over from the author and from authorial composition, especially if the author, say there are multiple authors, or the file's been passed around a lot to various machines. Then you have sort of hidden tagging dumps that you might never see as you're working with the files in Word. It might never occur to you that a word is displaying in italic, not because someone has italicized it, but because someone has applied emphasis to it. But if we have a way of detecting those actually before we run the transform, which catches most of them, and then if the transform will catch them and bring you direct when you're working in Oxygen, it'll make you directly where that error is, and it's generally a matter of 5 or 10 minutes work to get an entire project to then be valid.
That's a perfect segue to going back over to John, to you. You have your XML that's being generated by outside vendors, and I'm certain that what they're providing to you is a file that's been validated against your DTD. But there may be content issues or content problems. So is it the copy editor's responsibility to go through to clean up the file to be able to make sure that data is in the appropriate tag sets? Actually, the vendors do a remarkable job in, the idea is that we feed back to them, and the files that we get are better and better. And I mentioned that we also have some tools for validating it, for verifying that the content is right, and for helping to clean up common problems that come out of conversion and keying. In some cases, things are keyed. So by the time it gets to the copy editor and they've run the tools that they run initially, they actually wind up seeing very few problems of the kind that you're describing. Generally, the files are tagged the way they're supposed to be, and the content within the tags is what they need it to be. So they don't really wind up having to worry about the markup very much at all, unless there are changes that require changing the markup that they're making during copy editing. That's very good. I'm going to wrap up that are taking place in each of the workflows that were described. Are you using any kind of workflow management system or tracking system to be able to facilitate the flow of copy as it goes through these processes? At Chicago, we have a tracking database, a production database, but we don't have a content management system that actually holds the content and has the workflow built into it. We have a de facto system of scripts and that pay attention to the, as I described, to the metadata in the HTML. Some of it is production-related metadata. To update the database automatically, and the editors are able to push manuscripts out to the next stage in the workflow using menu items that call scripts that understand the workflow. So we have sort of a de facto system that understands how our content should be managed, but not a content management system.
Yeah, we don't have a fully integrated content management system either, and I kind of go back and forth in wondering if we actually have enough volume to warrant thinking about one. We have a very regularized workflow, though, so there's someone who's in control of the current version of a project at each point in that, and that's very clear from just looking at a production schedule, say, and whoever is in charge of that is essentially reporting the handoff, the completion, et cetera, whatever completes that phase of the cycle. So versioning is, I think, the biggest worry I have along those lines, and it's incredibly rare that anything goes wrong with that. So far, I'm not convinced that any sort of content management system is really warranted.
Okay. How long does it typically take to go from acceptance of piece for publication to when you've completed the publication process? And this may vary because in one case you may be dealing with a lot of books, in another case you're dealing with journals. But, for us, it can go extremely fast. We have fast-track manuscripts that could be accepted and online within a few days. We also, have normal, weeks-long, multiple weeks-long production processes for some of our other titles. It varies a lot by discipline for us, depending on the requirement and the staff.
Yeah, we have some variation, essentially project-based variation, and I think it probably, in our case, makes more sense to say from when a manuscript is released for editing than from when it's accepted, because that can vary depending on if it's accepted from a proposal, if it's a complete manuscript, if it's a partial manuscript, and how long the peer review takes. But, a sort of no-pressure situation, you might take 9 months for going from raw manuscript to books in the warehouse.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And I'm going to wrap up with just a couple of questions about interactions with authors and touch briefly back on the proofing issue. When you're going through your editing processes, you are going to encounter circumstances where you're going to have to make queries of authors and be able to get additional information back. How do you handle that process now within both of these systems?
Well, part of what I focused on, in addition to sort of all of the XML and the transform aspects of this upgrade, was standardizing that and also trying to move us a little more paperless. So right now, what I advocate, and I have just had no problems with this, is locking the Word files so that only track changes can register on them.
Yeah.
And I potentially have some boilerplate that I've given to all of our freelance editors, to all of our in-house editors, that instructs the author in how to set up Word so that the author can best deal with the files.
That's something that's very interesting because that could be applied to some of these very small publishing houses and they have small volumes of pages going through.
Definitely. The more information, because there's an idea that a lot of authors out there might be scared of Word, scared of trying to monkey around with their computer, with software. But I've just found that if you provide very clear instructions and just let them know that you're there to help with questions, we've really gotten very little pushback. And the pushback we've gotten are from people who, don't use computers at all. You're not emailing with them. You're only communicating over the phone or by letter. And so, yes, in that case, you're going to have to print out a manuscript and send it off and have it come back with pen marks on it. But we've had really great success with locking files for track changes.
John, how about from UCP?
Well, we have a few different methods in place. I mean, we have email communication occasionally with authors during the editing process to resolve some classes of problems. We, as I mentioned, have redlining occurring. We also have comments. We have the ability to create a nice edited manuscript, which we would save out to PDF and send, if we're doing a returned edited manuscript, send to the author and get feedback back from them via email or fax or whatever they want, phone call, whatever they want. And for the at the proofing stage, we actually use side note calls, AQ1, AQ2, AQ3, and drop all of the queries at the end of the article so that they could easily be copied and pasted into an email message, and authors generally are sending us their answers via email, except in medicine where they like fax and they like to print them out and write their answers on the paper that they fax back to us. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. very good sense. Are you encountering instances where the paperless workflow is being supported by commented PDFs?
We discourage the use of commented PDFs because we haven't found a very efficient way to get the information we need out of them.
I couldn't agree more.
All right. I want to thank you guys very much for your contributions today. I think it was a very informative session. There are some questions that I will ask each of you to get back to some of our users about. There were questions regarding some of our listeners. Get back to the questions about what databases were being used and that sort of thing. But I think that those are much more appropriate for direct interaction. So I'll make sure that those questions are forwarded to you gentlemen. Thank you very much for the excellent presentations today and for your openness and clear communication in the Q&A session. That wraps up our webinar for this afternoon. I'd like to remind each of you to be able to provide feedback to us through the question and answer session. Thank you very much, and good day to all.